Quiet on set. Speed. And action.
I know it was you, Fredo. You broke my heart.
You know how to whistle, don't you? You just put your lips together and blow.
Welcome to the Foot and Friends on Film podcast, discussing everything about cinema. Now here's your host, Nick Mailer.
What's in the bar? Houston, we have a problem. You can't handle the truth. I'm not what she said. You're crazy.
Welcome to the official podcast of Foot and Friends on Film.com, where we discuss everything about cinema. I'm your host, Nick Mailer. On today's episode, it's Oscar talk, folks. The 92nd Academy Awards are just around the corner, so John and I sit down, we discuss Oscar ceremonies past, present, and future. Got a whole lot of things to discuss, so take your seats and grab your popcorn. It's time for your feature presentation. As mentioned, we are the official podcast of Foot and Friends on Film.com, where our motto is, any film you have not seen is a new experience. The 92nd Academy Awards are less than a week away, so John and I sat down to discuss the ceremony. We also talked about some of our favorite and least favorite moments from Oscars past, that and a whole lot more. So please, without further ado, welcome John H. Foote. All right, so the 92nd Academy Awards are this Sunday. A fan and listener of ours, Dan Von Diergaard, wrote in with a question, wants to know, how does one go about getting an Oscar nomination? Who votes? What's the process? And how does one win?
Good question. It's actually a long process. To begin, a film has to be released in North America between January 1st and December 31st of the calendar year in Los Angeles and New York. And it has to be in theaters for a single week. And then they can withdraw it from theaters, do whatever they want. And based on that, the studio then campaigns the film for Best Picture, Director, Acting Awards, whatever. And they do that by a series of, they're called FYC ads, for your consideration ads. In addition, they send out screeners to members of the Academy, members of the various guilds, and certain critics throughout North America. And based on those screeners, we'll put them on our 10 best list or re-review them and build buzz for the film. From there, each division of the Academy votes on the particular category. So an example, film editors nominate the 5 best film editors. Cinematographers nominate the 5 best cinematographers. Writers, the 5 best writers. Directors, actors, and so on and so on. And everybody votes on the nominees for Best Picture. So once you have your nomination, the entire Academy votes on who wins. So you have people who know nothing about acting voting on Best Actor. You have people who know nothing about film editing voting on film editing. And this is where I think the Academy needs a bit of work.
Right. So you have actors voting for cinematography winners, etc.
Yeah, and I mean, how much actors aren't stupid people. I'm not suggesting that at all. But how much do they really know about the art of cinematography? How much work goes into a shot and the selection of lenses and the lighting and the composition? And is it what the director wants? Because that has to come into it too. I question how much actors know about that. And in some cases, writers and directors as well. How much do they know about really what the cinematographer does? And I think it would be a better situation if each category was, so the winner was selected by members of that particular guild.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, I have some experience in acting, but as far as cinematography goes, I don't know anything. Or it's interesting, and it might explain some of the things we've seen in the past that might not necessarily make sense on the face of it.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. You have some films in I don't want to say the old days, but before the 90s that would win 10 Academy Awards or 11 Academy Awards. And you just know that some people got that nomination ballot and checked off one film all the way through because they thought it was the best in all the categories. They didn't know. They just made those decisions. Titanic, I think, benefited from that enormously. It was a big studio film. It was a big comeback for Hollywood. So some people got the ballot and just, Titanic every category. And it ends up tying Ben-Hur for the most wins ever. And I mean, really, Titanic?
Well, on that vein, let's take a look at some of the times Oscar hasn't exactly gotten it right. What are in your opinion, are the worst Best Picture winners?
If I was to go through and choose the 10 worst Best Picture winners, the top of the list would be The Greatest Show on Earth in 1952. It defeated High Noon, The Quiet Man, and the not nominated Singin' in the Rain, and is just a horrible soap opera set in the world of The Big Top, Barnum and Bailey Circus. Cavalcade, a terrible musical which bested King Kong, another one not nominated for Best Picture. Cimarron, a horrible Western in 1931 that bested Chaplin's masterpiece, City Lights. An American in Paris, which is a musical about nothing, and I kid you not, nothing. There's no narrative in this film. It's all singing and all dancing, and it's beautiful to look at. But does anybody really believe it's a better film than A Streetcar Named Desire, one of the greatest American films of the 50s? Around the World in 80 Days, 5 years later, is one of those spot the star movies, cast of thousands, and a lot of movie stars in small parts. But under no circumstances is it better than The Searchers or The Ten Commandments or Giant or Moby Dick. I mean, it won because it was a big producer's movie. The Sting is a handsome movie to look at, beautifully designed, well scored, and a great movie star film. But it's not better than American Graffiti. It's not better than The Exorcist or Last Tango in Paris. And everybody knew it. And one of the most shameful wins in the 70s was Rocky, which was nominated against 3 of the greatest films ever made, All the President's Men, Network, and Taxi Driver. And Rocky wins Best Picture. The Deer Hunter, another case of, had the voting come a month later, The Deer Hunter wouldn't have won. It's predicated on lies. The director told lies when he made the film and put lies all through the movie. He was never a Marine in Vietnam, like he told people. And that was, a horrible case. Chariots of Fire in 1981, I very nearly put my foot through the television. The young lady I was with at the time held me back, but I was hell-bent on damaging that TV when Chariots of Fire defeated Reds. A year later, same thing, Gandhi wins Best Picture, and I was headed for the TV. And the director of Gandhi, Richard Attenborough, actually stopped on his way to the stage to speak to Steven Spielberg to tell him this really should be for you. Shakespeare in Love in 1998, defeating one of the greatest war movies ever made, Saving Private Ryan, was ludicrous, and everybody knew it. How does the best directed, best shot, best edited, and best sounding movie lose Best Picture? And the most recent was Crash in 2005. Just a ridiculous win. I don't know how it happened. Homophobia in the Academy for sure, because the best film I saw that year was Brokeback Mountain. So there's 10.
A lot of great films have not been nominated.
Yes.
What are some that come to mind?
Some of the films that have not been nominated for Best Picture are some of the greatest films ever made. I'll start in the 60s with Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. Like many people, I've seen it many times. Can I tell you what it's about? I think so. But you're going to have an opinion. Someone else is going to have an opinion. Someone else is going to have an opinion. And that's okay, because that's what Kubrick wanted. He wanted to provoke discussion. It was nominated for Best Director, but did not get a Best Picture nomination, which I think was shameful. One of the greatest films ever made about international terrorism, Black Sunday in 1977, was snubbed for everything. Wasn't nominated for a single Academy Award, despite being worthy in many of the top categories. Woody Allen's Manhattan is probably his greatest film, and he won the Oscar in '77 for Annie Hall for Best Picture and Director. But Manhattan got just 2 nominations for Screenplay and Supporting Actress, and absolutely should have been there for Best Picture and Best Director for Allen. Hair in 1979, same thing, a wonderful musical, again snubbed for Best Picture, and it for sure should have been in there. It was one of the great ones. And more recently, The Disaster Artist, I think, should have been a nominee for Best Picture. Hostile, the Western you and I saw together at TIFF, absolutely should have been a Best Picture nominee. It was one of the greatest Westerns I've ever seen. There have been so many through history. It's insane. And to the Academy's credit, most of the time, I would say they get it right. 50, maybe less than 50%. They do pretty good, but boy, they've made some crushing mistakes through the years. The Dark Knight, I'll add that as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely should have been a Best Picture nominee in 2008. And because of The Dark Knight not being nominated, they instituted this ridiculous rule of going from 5 to 10 nominees for Best Picture, and it hasn't changed anything.
What about some of the worst acting awards? I know you want to talk about Roberto Benigni.
You can read my mind. I sat there that night and watched Edward Norton, Tom Hanks sit in their seats looking on in horror that they had just lost to this organ grinder's monkey, this performing little Italian clown that made one of the most irresponsible films ever made, called Life is Beautiful, about the Holocaust. And Benigni wasn't acting. What you see in that film, that's Roberto Benigni. There was no performance given there at all. The real performance in '98 was Edward Norton in American History X, playing a neo-Nazi. He was absolutely terrifying in that film. That scene where he kills the kid on the curb and the cops come and he puts his hand behind his head and turns to his brother with that arrogant, cruel smile. That's just pure Aryan power in every way. And for that scene alone, he should have won the Academy Award. But you can go as far back as Jimmy Stewart in the Philadelphia Story in 1940. Jimmy Stewart should have won the award the year before for Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. So they made it up to him the next year for one of his weakest performances in the Philadelphia Story. Orson Welles should have won the award in '41 for Citizen Kane, and that didn't happen. Art Carney winning in 1974 for Harry and Tonto, besting Al Pacino in The Godfather Part 2, Dustin Hoffman in Lenny, and Jack Nicholson in Chinatown. And Art Carney wins Best Actor. I mean, it boggles the mind.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sorry.
No, that one, is very, very bizarre.
I just don't understand it. Did they split the vote? Did Pacino and Nicholson split the vote? Maybe, and Art Carney picked up the slack, but you have to wonder what happened to Dustin Hoffman in there. He was certainly one of the great performances of the year that was ignored. And it's kind of shameful. Peter Finch in 1976 insisted on being campaigned in a lead role for a supporting role in Network, had a massive heart attack after the nominations were announced, died, and then won Best Actor for Network. And I mean, come on, the only reason he won was because he died. It was a good performance. It's not a great performance. The greatest performance that year, and I'll go toe-to-toe with anybody, was Robert De Niro in Taxi Driver. There's no question. And yet Finch ends up Best Actor of the Year. Henry Fonda in 1981, playing an old man. Boy, there's a stretch, an 82-year-old guy playing an 82-year-old guy. And he wins Best Actor for On Golden Pond. The best performance that year was another old guy, Burt Lancaster in Atlantic City, who gave the absolute performance of his career in that film and didn't win the award. There's just been so many silly wins through the years. It's crazy. Sandra Bullock winning for The Blind Side in 2009 was insane. She's up against Meryl Streep and Julia, and there's no contest. Streep gave a performance for the ages, and yet they give it to Sandra Bullock. She should have got it a few years later in Gravity. She was spectacular in that film.
What about Gary Oldman and Rami Malek?
Well, I was hoping you bring up Oldman. I was going to let you bring it up. we saw that together, didn't we?
We did, yes.
Yeah, and I think I said then, or shortly after the film, the makeup did all the work, and I stand by that. There have been better actors, or there have been better performances of Winston Churchill. Gary Oldman's a wonderful actor. I love his work, but I didn't love it in Darkest Hour. I thought the makeup did all the work for him, the makeup and the fat suit. Albert Finney, Brendan Gleeson, John Lithgow have all played Churchill, and they've all played Churchill better, especially Brendan Gleeson. I think he was spectacular. But Gary Oldman was due. They have this thing where all of a sudden this particular actor is due. It's his time. And they did it with Matthew McConaughey for Dallas Buyers Club, and they did it with Gary Oldman, and it was kind of shameful because he was trotted out to all these award shows and they're giving him an award that he clearly knew he didn't deserve. But what do you do? Last year, I will never understand the love for Bohemian Rhapsody. And beyond Rami Malek, how does it win film editing, sound editing, and sound? And why are the record album guys not collecting the sound awards? I mean, they did the sound of this thing years ago. Rami Malek looked like Freddie Mercury. He had the prosthetic teeth. He moved like him. I'll give him that. He captured the stage presence, but he didn't do his own singing. And that to me is a big problem. This guy that played Elton John this year, Taron Egerton, did his own singing. Gary Busey did his own singing when he played Buddy Holly. Sissy Spacek did her own singing when she played Loretta Lynn. And they nailed it. They captured it. Rami Malek didn't. He lip synced to Freddie Mercury, and I think gave half a performance. The makeup and the record albums did the rest.
Yeah, there was this opinion floating around that, well, nobody can sing like Freddie Mercury. And
Probably right. But you know what, Nick, they said that about Jim Morrison too. And Val Kilmer got the part for Oliver Stone and did his own singing. And nobody knew it for about a week. The film was in theaters and everyone's thinking he's lip syncing. And then they go on national TV and we find out Kilmer did his own singing. And people were knocked out. I went back to see the movie again because I couldn't believe anybody could ever sing like Jim Morrison. And this guy did it.
Yeah, and you know what? Maybe no one can sing like Freddie Mercury, but A, try, or B, don't give him the Oscar then.
I agree. At least try. At least try. Renee Zellweger this year is going to win for Judy in the Judy Garland film. Nobody sounds like Judy Garland. She had an absolutely unique voice. But Zellweger tried. And you know what she did do that Rami Malek didn't do? She captured Garland's soul because her soul was in her singing. And that's what lacked in the Malek performance. For me, it was an example of acting in quotation marks. And actors are never supposed to be seen acting. And Rami Malek acted all over the place.
Yeah, and I think it's a shame that Taron Egerton didn't get nominated this year for Best Actor in a performance that's leaps and bounds above.
Absolutely. And that's part of the fallout of the Rami Malek win. That win canceled out Taron Egerton this year because I guarantee some members of the Academy are saying, well, we did that last year. Why bother? And why bother? Because he deserved it. That's why you bother. The kid should have been nominated. Absolutely should have been. And Malek's win prevented some great performances last year from not winning. I would have given it to Viggo Mortensen in Green Book. You would have given it to Christian Bale in Vice. And two better performances for sure.
Let's talk about some great performances that didn't get nominated. What are some that come to mind?
Didn't get nominated or didn't win?
Either one.
Wow, you could go way, way back for this one. I mean, certainly Orson Welles and Citizen Kane deserved to win for that performance. I mean, he wrote it, he directed it, and he gave that performance. He was 24 years old when he made that movie, and he aged from 24 to 80 convincingly, and not many people can pull that off. Even further back, Chaplin in City Lights absolutely should have won the Academy Award for Best Actor. That's a timeless performance. Holds up as well today as it did back then. The supporting characters in The Wizard of Oz, The Wicked Witch of the West, terrified generations. And I would have given her an Oscar just because she scared the hell out of me. And The Tin Man, The Scarecrow, The Cowardly Lion, all should have been nominated and were not. And then you move through the years. Brando in A Streetcar Named Desire should have won the Oscar. Gloria Swanson in Sunset Boulevard. I still can't believe she didn't win in 1950. She so deserved it. John Wayne in The Searchers. That's a towering performance, the best thing he ever did. And anybody that ever says John Wayne was always the same, I show them that movie and then say, now shut up because you're wrong. He was a racist maniac in that film and played it to perfection. It was a brilliant, brilliant performance. And you can carry that on right up through the years. More recently, James Franco being snubbed for The Disaster Artist was Criminal. That was a brilliant performance. And the fact he directed the movie makes it even greater. Christian Bale in Hostiles. I mean, Christian Bale's got his share of nominations, but he should have been there for Hostiles. He channeled John Wayne from The Searchers for that performance. There's so many similarities. And he pays homage to him, but puts his own stamp on it as well. And so many others. Viggo Mortensen in the Lord of the Rings films. Sean Astin in the Lord of the Rings films as Sam. There's Meryl Streep. Though she's had 21 nominations, there have been years that she should have been nominated. and wasn't. And it's frustrating because, like you, I studied acting, and acting has always helped me a lot as a film critic in the study of the film, because it's the acting I look to first. And seeing great acting has always been a really profound experience for me. And seeing it ignored or passed over, or seeing weaker performances win over a great piece of acting, is a horror show. The year Art Carney defeated Al Pacino in The Godfather Part 2, I was in tears that a performance that silly, that average, beat out something that I knew. Even then, I was 15 years old, and I knew I'd be talking about The Godfather Part 2 the rest of my life. And 45 years later, here I am still talking about it and still angry that he lost.
Yeah, I'd argue Pacino's finest work.
Absolutely. No question, his finest work. And the Academy foolishly didn't give it to him. And then they do give it to him for one of the worst performances ever put on film, in Scent of a Woman, which is all bombast and hoo-ha.
I'll state for the record that I agree he shouldn't have won that Oscar, but I do enjoy that movie.
I don't at all.
All right, let's talk about some great director snubs.
There have been a few of these, and some of them are so surprising that it leaves you wondering if the Oscars actually see some of the movies. A couple of the greatest snubs in history for me, that Francis Ford Coppola lost Best Director for Apocalypse Now, because his achievement on that film was monumental. If you watch the documentary his wife shot, Hearts of Darkness, and see what that man went through putting that film together, and then watch what he put on screen, it's astonishing. It's absolutely astonishing that he pulled it off. Sidney Lumet being ignored for Prince of the City, a brilliant police film about corruption within the police force. Another one that should have been nominated. So many roles, so many intricate stories going on, and he's snubbed for it. The most recent one that really upset me was Catherine Bigelow for Zero Dark 30. I mean, the best directorial achievement of the year, along with Spielberg and Lincoln, and she's ignored. If you go back through history, some of the greatest directors in movie history never won a Best Director Oscar, beginning with Chaplin, Charlie Chaplin, who essentially created the art of film directing. Never won an Oscar. Never won an Oscar for Best Director. City Lights, Modern Times, The Great Dictator, nothing. Howard Hawks, one of the great directors of the 40s, didn't even get nominated for Red River or later for Rio Bravo. Stanley Kubrick, some people consider him the greatest director of all time, was nominated for Best Director 4 times, but did not win. He was up for Dr. Strangelove, 2001: A Space Odyssey, A Clockwork Orange, for which he should have won, and Barry Lyndon, but he never won a single Academy Award for Best Director. And that's a giant of a filmmaker. That's not a little guy, that's a big guy. A lot of polls list Alfred Hitchcock as the greatest director in movie history. I say baloney to that, but he absolutely should have won Best Director for Psycho. And again, he never won an Academy Award, not one. 5 nominations, but not a single award. So there's been a slew of them that have not won an Oscar.
I have to just backpedal a bit. I forgot to mention something. We're talking about actors who've never been nominated or performances that didn't win. I guess it's kind of both. I have to give a shout out to Andy Serkis. Who I believe in War for the Planet of the Apes should have won Best Actor, and you could make the argument that for Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, he should have also been nominated. His performance as Caesar the Chimp in all 3 of those movies is something quite remarkable.
It is, and he's kind of pioneered the whole motion capture performance. He did it with Gollum in the Lord of the Rings films, King Kong, and then those pictures. And he's extremely gifted. And if they're not going to include motion capture in the Best Actor category, create a category for it, Best Mocap Performance, or give him a special Academy Award just in honor of his achievement, what he's created, because what he's created is a whole new way of acting, and I think that deserves to be recognized. And he certainly helped other actors figure it out. Tom Hanks has learned to do it, many others, but he seems to be the king of it. He seems to be the best at it, period.
He's also become a director, and he seems that to be doing all right at that. He directed the movie Breathe. Was it Breathe or Breath? I think it was Breathe. And
Breathe, yeah.
And he directed a Jungle Book adaptation, which was all motion capture performances. It was called Mowgli, Legend of the Jungle.
Yeah, he's a smart guy. He's a smart guy. He's a pretty decent actor too. Beyond, the apes when he's Andy Serkis on screen, he was the cook in King Kong, and he played kind of a snarling know-it-all who really knew nothing, and he was very funny, very funny.
Yeah, Lumpy the cook. He also had a supporting role in Black Panther, where he got to kind of chew the scenery, which I quite enjoyed.
He can chew scenery. He can chew scenery as much as Pacino can, and he has fun doing it.
Yeah, and he nails that South African accent, which amongst actors is often considered one of the hardest to do.
Well, Denzel Washington certainly says that. When he played Stephen Biko in Cry Freedom, he said he very nearly quit the film because he couldn't nail that accent, and he finally did. But it's a tough one.
What are some wins that have made you smile over the years? I mean, for me, the biggest one that comes to mind is Martin Scorsese winning Best Director for The Departed.
Yeah, that absolutely made me smile too. Long overdue. And it was exciting when his friends walked out to present it, Spielberg, Lucas, and Coppola. What if he'd have lost?
I know.
It must have been a pretty sure thing he was going to win. But Clint Eastwood was nominated that year too. And he's won a couple, and they love him. And I always wondered, what would have happened had they opened the envelope and it's not Martin Scorsese? That would have been interesting.
Yeah.
But moments that made me smile, wins that made me smile, Steven Spielberg winning in '93 for Schindler's List. The complete domination of Schindler's List, because I think it's an absolute masterwork of a movie. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, sweeping the awards in 1975, was pretty glorious. Steven Spielberg winning again for Saving Private Ryan in 1998. I love seeing Catherine Bigelow finally break the glass and win Best Director for The Hurt Locker. The Godfather Part 2's domination in 1974, 6 awards. Warren Beatty winning for Reds, richly, richly deserved. I love seeing Peter Jackson in Return of the King win every single award it was nominated for in 2003. That was exciting. And seeing Clint Eastwood win Best Director for Unforgiven. Unforgiven is a work of art, an absolute stunning work of art. And seeing him win Best Director for that was pretty fine. I was absolutely okay with that one.
I've had some sentimental picks usually each year. There's one award that I'm really, really particular about, and a couple of times it's been for supporting actor. First of all, Heath Ledger winning for The Dark Knight.
Yes.
It bothers me that to this day some people say that he won that award because he died.
No, he didn't.
No, he definitely
He won because he was brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, Christoph Waltz for Inglourious Bastards was one that made me happy.
A great performance, just a stunning piece of work. And it should have been a surprise he won. He won so many critics awards leading up to the Oscars.
Yeah, and also to see Christian Bale win for The Fighter.
Well, he was one of those ones where the Academy decided he was due, and they better give him one before somebody screamed, false voting, because he was such a wonderful actor. He was terrific in The Fighter, which is a good thing. It stops the argument of sentimental award, but he'll be there a few more times. He's a man of 1,000 faces for this generation. He'll be back many, many times.
I remember seeing images of him in the makeup as Dick Cheney for Vice.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, all right. Well, I see where they're going with it. And so I'd seen what he looked like. And then when the trailer came out, my jaw hit the floor.
Yeah, he was Cheney.
Every single mannerism, the way he talked out of the side of his mouth, the way he shifted his weight, I couldn't not believe it.
Yep, that crisp, angry, condescending way of speaking. He had everything absolutely down. And if you go back and watch documentary footage about the fellow he played in Ford versus Ferrari, same thing. He's got this guy down. His research is so meticulous and so complete that there's nothing he doesn't know about the character. And directors just kind of stand back in awe of watching what he's going to do, because he's one of those guys, he's going to do something miraculous every time out. So just get out of his way and let him do it.
What do you think are some of the greatest acceptance speeches you've seen at the Oscars?
Certainly Tom Hanks. I mean, both of his in 93 and 94 were pretty spectacular. My favorite one of all time is Joe Pesci for Goodfellas. He walked to the stage, walked to the microphone, accepted his Oscar, and he said, "Thank you, it was my privilege," and walked off. And I thought, wow, that's how to do it, you know? He was courteous in every way, and he made it very clear that he was just privileged to be working with Martin Scorsese. And that was so classy. I like Daniel Day-Lewis's speech for Lincoln. That was a lot of fun. He made fun of himself. He made fun of Meryl Streep, and she had a good time with that as well. There've been quite a few of them. Coppola in '74 for The Godfather Part 2 made a great speech about all of his family winning and the embracing of the Coppola legacy. His daughter winning in 2003 was exciting, and her speech was very humble, very kind. Most of the time, the speeches are pretty good. Every now and then there's a howler, and you wonder, what are they thinking? What are they doing? But for the most part, I think most people are humble and dignified about it. When Jack Palance won, I thought that was kind of insane, because he just went off the deep end and gave Billy Crystal fodder for the whole night. You know, Billy Crystal could run on what Jack Palance was doing or saying all night long. And it was clearly a sentimental award. There's no way this guy gave better performances than any of the other nominees, but they gave it to him because he was old.
I particularly like watching Robin Williams' acceptance speech for Good Will Hunting.
Really cool. Such a humble guy. He'd been nominated before, and I think he was finally thinking, I'm never going to win this thing. And that night in particular, Burt Reynolds was supposed to win that award for Boogie Nights. He'd won all the critics awards, and everybody expected it's Burt Reynolds. You know, he's finally going to win. And, you know, I think I'd have picked him to win, because I think Williams should have won a few other times, Awakenings for sure, and a couple other films. But it was Robbins that night, and I'm glad he won.
Yeah, and he mentioned his father. He said, when I told my father I wanted to be an actor, he said, just have something to fall back on, like welding.
Yep. Yeah, he was always on, you know.
Yeah, for sure. Particularly sad one was going back to watch Philip Seymour Hoffman's acceptance speech, not just because of seeing him, but also because he was nominated against Heath Ledger, and it's just like, wow, the talent we lost.
Yeah, that was a tough year, because the two of them were so good, and if it was mine to pick, I'd have given the edge to Ledger. I thought the final scene in Brokeback Mountain, where he's holding Jack's shirt and he adjusts the postcard of the mountain inside the closet and whispers, "Jack, I swear," and his eyes fill with tears. And you can just feel the love and the longing and the hurt and the regret going through him at that moment. I thought it was just extraordinary. I liked what Hoffman did as Capote. It was a very good performance. But I'll tell you, there was another guy that played Capote in another film called Infamous that was essentially the same story, Toby Jones.
Yeah.
And he was wonderful as Capote, more animated and vivacious, which Capote was. He was a party boy in New York City. And I'm not sure he didn't deserve to be nominated.
Just looking back a bit, any favorite Oscar hosts?
Yeah, quite a few. I mean, I think it's a thankless job, and they all pretty much admit that it's a horrible job. But Johnny Carson always did a great job. He was the host for as long as I can remember, and I really liked what he did. Billy Crystal is probably the king of it. He's fast on his feet. He does not rattle, and he goes with the flow of the show. And he's just really confident, really good at it. I think Steve Martin did a great job. I think Steve Martin and Alec Baldwin together did a great job. I quite like Ellen DeGeneres as the host. I think, again, she was quick, fast on her feet, witty, and I think you need to be. Whoopi Goldberg was always a dynamite host, and I wish they had let her do it a few more times. Hugh Jackman did a great job. His opening number was very funny, very, very, very apt, very perfect.
Yeah.
And I think one of the great introductions of all time was Whoopi Goldberg introducing Woody Allen, who came for 9/11 to do a speech about New York on film, and gave one of the great speeches of all time. You know, it was just brilliant. The last couple of years they've gone hostless. I'm okay with that too. It keeps the show moving. You know, the show moves a little quicker, I think, without one.
Yeah, I really dug Hugh Jackman doing it, and I was excited when he was announced because he's a song and dance man, and
Yes.
he had hosted the Tony Awards, and it kind of made sense. That's eventually why they gave it to Neil Patrick Harris
Yeah.
because
No, I know.
he just had hosted everything, and he was like considered the best at it, and they're like, well, we might as well just let NPH do it.
And he did very good. He did very good.
Yeah, I loved Hugh Jackman's opening number. I actually still think I can recite it line by line.
He was
And
terrific.
and I saw Hugh Jackman live in concert once, and I actually got to shake his hand and meet him briefly, and he was a really classy guy, and I'd like to see
Really
him
decent
again.
guy. Yeah, really decent man. Really, really cool.
Makes you wonder who the next Wolverine might be, but that's a
It
subject
does.
for another
It
podcast.
does. Yeah. Somebody younger.
I've heard a lot of whispers online about Taron Egerton, and I would be totally fine with that.
He might be. He might be. He's got the look.
Yeah, just needs the mutton chops, hit the gym, and then he's good to go.
Mm-hmm.
So this year we're not really expecting a whole lot of surprises, are we, in the big awards?
Not really. With so many precursor awards and the Critics Awards and the Globes and the Guilds, it's pretty much a done deal, I think. I don't think there will be any major surprises. That said, you never know. Green Book was a big surprise last year. What happened with La La Land and Moonlight was a big surprise. William Goldman once said, you never know until it's over. Nobody knows nothing. And he was right. I think we'll get a surprise or two for sure, but I'm not sure they'll be where people think they'll be.
So let's start with our predictions. I don't think we need to go through a lot of the technical awards. Actually, I just want to mention that I think one thing, this was probably a sure thing, but it's a lesser award that I always care a great deal about just as a musician is Best Original Song. And I think Elton John is going to win a second Academy Award for...
I think he is too. I think he is too. The only competition is Cynthia Erivo for her song from Harriet, which is a women's film, and a black woman winning the Academy Award would offend nobody. So it wouldn't surprise me if she gets in there, but I do think they'll go with Elton John.
There's a wonderful song, as if Rocket Man wasn't a brilliant enough movie in and of itself. There is a great song that Bernie Taupin and Elton John wrote for the closing credits of the film. It's called I'm Gonna Love Me Again.
Yes.
And it's a duet between Elton John and Taron Egerton, the man who plays him in the movie. And it's just a great song.
It is. It is. And it's you're probably right. It's probably going to win. But if they go with, if the Me Too movement has anything to do with it, it'll go to Harriet.
I'm taking that Best Original Song as the consolation prize for the Taron Egerton snub, but that's me personally.
No, nothing will get me over that. That was sinful.
It really was, and that still remains one of my favorite movies of the year.
It was a terrific movie. It was very entertaining, and he was outstanding as Elton John. Just a great performance.
The scene where he is in the phone booth and he has to call his mother to tell her that he's gay.
Yeah.
That would be the clip that they would show, I think, if he was nominated. That'd be the one they'd show at the ceremony.
It's a brilliant piece of acting.
So for the screenplay awards, there's original screenplay and adapted screenplay. How do we see these ones going?
I think original screenplay initially was going to go to Tarantino. I thought, he'd get his third Oscar for this, and it might make up from him not winning Best Director, which I don't think he will do anymore. But now I kind of think Parasite's going to take Best Original Screenplay. There's a real love-in for this movie that I don't understand. I thought it was very ordinary. I liked it, but I didn't love it. And I certainly don't think it's among the best films of the year, not even the best 10 films of the year. But I do think that the filmmaker, Bong Joon-ho, is going to win Best Screenplay, Best Original Screenplay.
And adapted?
Wow.
I mean, I'm rooting for The Irishman.
Yeah, and it should. It absolutely should. But I think Taika Waititi is going to win it for Jojo Rabbit. It won the Writers Guild Awards, and that's usually a precursor. But, you've got Greta Gerwig in there for Little Women, and there was a real backlash when she wasn't nominated for Best Director, and she didn't deserve to be nominated for Best Director. She was maybe the 6th or 7th Best Achievement in Direction of the year, 7th maybe, but not the best 5. So they might give her screenplay as a consolation prize, maybe. I hope not, and I'd jump and cheer if The Irishman wins. It should win.
I can speak to this a little bit because I actually read the book I Heard You Paint Houses twice prior to seeing the movie.
Yes.
And Steve Zalian, it's really quite an achievement how he, with a book to movie adaptation, you always need to sort of condense things and reduce it down to its essence, and a lot of scenes in that movie are compiled of things that happened over many different interactions and stuff.
Yeah.
But that book covers a lot, and there are some changes and omissions that were made. I did an article, a list of 10 things that were changed or omitted from I Heard You Paint Houses, but having read the book and seen the movie a bunch of times, I would really, really be happy if he won the Adapted Screenplay Award.
Well, he's a great writer, and he's been here before. He won for Schindler's List in '93, and absolutely deserved it for that. And he did the same thing. He had a massive book to adapt, and he captured the essence of Oskar Schindler perfectly. There were omissions from the book. There were some sequences that were merged together, like there are here. But he captured the essence, and I think that's what a man writing an adapted screenplay has to do. I think if they do that, they've achieved a lot.
Let's get on to the acting awards. Best Supporting Actress. This is the one where you think there might be a surprise.
I do. So far, Laura Dern has marched through the season, winning everything for Best Supporting Actress for Marriage Story. And she's terrific. She really is. She's got a great speech about women getting screwed over in divorce court. And I think that's why she's winning. But I think there might be a surprise here. I've got a feeling Scarlett Johansson could sneak in for Best Supporting Actress for Jojo Rabbit. She gives a sunny, delightful comic performance as this mother who despises the Nazis, while her son is an absolute lover of Adolf Hitler. His imaginary friend is Adolf Hitler. And it's a really nice performance from Johansson, a real pleasant surprise that she's got comic ability. I mean, who'd have thought? And when you balance this against her work in Marriage Story, which is deeply dramatic and equally great, and her performance as Black Widow in Avengers Endgame, this is a really talented actress, somebody whose range I think hasn't been fully tapped. And I'd love to see her win.
The supporting actor category is pretty much a lock for Brad Pitt, who was, let's face it, he was great in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. He's a great actor. I know that, again, we have this soft spot for The Irishman. If it were up to you, it would be going to Joe Pesci. And if it were up to me, it would be maybe a coin toss between Pesci and Pacino, who both deliver great work in The Irishman. But we're not expecting a surprise here, are we?
No. And I think if you line them up, I mean, of that category, Pitt's the only one that doesn't have an Oscar for acting. He's won for producing. But if you look at it at terms of challenge, the role challenging the actor, and in terms of range, Pesci gets it every time. Pesci played a character unlike anything he's ever done before. He's never done anything Russell Buffalino before. And he spoke volumes in his silences. That scene where De Niro hops on a plane to go to Detroit, and Pesci sits in the car for 3 hours, waits for him, speaks volumes about his admiration for De Niro, his how much he admires De Niro, and yet also speaks to the fact that De Niro will do anything he tells him to do. And he never raises his voice. He's polite, he's gentle, but he doesn't raise his voice because he doesn't have to. He's very confident in his power and his power over people. And I thought it was just a miracle of a performance from Joe Pesci. And in any other year, he'd win. But this is Brad Pitt's time.
Brad Pitt has really been given the best acceptance speeches this season.
I like that he makes fun of himself. He's a really cool guy. I've interviewed him a couple times, and he's a really nice guy. And makes fun of himself, doesn't take himself terribly seriously. and loves acting. You know, he truly is a movie star who's an actor. There's an actor living in that body. And he's done some great work before. Some he's been recognized for, some not. This is one of his best, without question.
Yeah. For our listeners, anyone who has not seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, there is a scene involving Brad Pitt and a can of dog food, which made me laugh really, 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 really hard. Keep an eye out for that if you haven't seen it. I liked how when he accepted, I think it was the SAG award, he said he has to put this on his Tinder profile.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, we all know the role. A guy who gets high, takes his shirt off, doesn't get along with his wife. It was quite a stretch.
And the camera cut directly to his ex-wife, Jennifer Aniston, which was terrific.
And everybody's hoping they get back together now.
Well, you never know. You never know. Never say never.
Well, she didn't want kids, and now he's got a bunch, so that's the obstacle out of the way.
Yeah.
Getting back to Joe Pesci, you're absolutely right in your description of his performance. And I think what's amongst the many layers of things that are amazing about The Irishman is that you have Robert De Niro and Al Pacino both sort of leaning towards their strengths here. De Niro being the strong, silent type, and Pacino being the loud, bombastic bully, and both at the top of their game, doing it as good as they've ever done it.
Yeah.
And then with Joe Pesci, the whole thing is flipped. You're used to seeing him as a raging psycho, just a total loose cannon. And in this, nothing, it never raises his voice. It's truly remarkable.
Yep, we're used to seeing, you're right, we're used to seeing Pesci as a ball of energy, a dangerous, deadly man. And he still is, but he just never raises his voice because he doesn't have to raise his voice. And he knows it. And that's true power, you know.
If it were up to me, the Best Actor award would be going to Taron Egerton, but he's not nominated, and so that is neither here nor there, but it's obviously going to go to Joaquin Phoenix.
Yeah, there's no question. And I have no argument with that. I thought what he did in Joker was absolutely spectacular, wildly original, and kind of creepy, kind of bizarrely frightening, a real portrait of a guy descending into absolute madness. And we haven't seen anything like that really since Taxi Driver. It's been a long time since you saw a slow burn like that of a guy descending into insanity. And I loved what he did. I loved what he did with his body, with his voice, with his face. It was just an extraordinary piece of acting that will elevate. All the superhero films are going to be elevated because of this movie. And they'll all aspire to be what this movie was. And to me, that's special. That could mean we'll get some really good ones potentially.
This will mark only the second time in Academy Awards history where two actors will have won Oscars for portraying the same character in different movies. The first example of this was when Marlon Brando and Robert De Niro each won Oscars for portraying Vito Corleone at different ages in The Godfather and The Godfather Part 2.
Absolutely true.
And of course, as we know, Heath Ledger won Best Supporting Actor for his portrayal of the Joker in The Dark Knight. The only difference is that where De Niro and Brando very much played the same character at different ages, Joaquin Phoenix's Joker and Heath Ledger's Joker are not the same character, and that they exist in different fictional universes and they're different interpretations, but still noteworthy that it'll only be the second time that's happened. Now,
it's interesting that you have two characters in the same universe, but it's also a little bit like Shakespeare. Different actors have played Macbeth and played Hamlet through the years, and directors have put them in different places in history, so the interpretation is different. And it's interesting that a superhero film and a comic book could offer such a challenge for an actor, and it did for both Todd Phillips and Joaquin Phoenix.
Yeah, and as I've said many times, these comic book characters, they're archetypes of modern folklore. You know, you go from you can look at Batman, you go back to Zorro, you go back to Robin Hood, to Greek myths, to Hercules and stuff. It's nothing new. It's just a new way of looking at them. And so yeah, there's room for different actors to play them. you know, I mean, we're getting another actor playing Batman, and that's a conversation for an upcoming podcast that you and I are going to have.
Yes.
The Best Actress award is going to go to Renee Zellweger.
Yep, no question, and it should.
Agreed.
It should. I walked into Judy last year at TIFF, not really knowing what to expect, and quite frankly, not expecting much. I certainly didn't think that Renee Zellweger would embody Judy Garland like she did. And yet she looked like her, she moved like her. She had that strange body shape Judy Garland had, those odd hips, and captured her soul. And her singing, she doesn't sound exactly like Judy Garland, but she doesn't have to, because she found the character's soul, and it comes out in the singing. And it's a performance for the ages. I'll be talking about this for a long, long time. And good for her. Good for her for coming back so powerfully.
Yeah, I have no argument with this one. And I think I juxtapose it with Taron Egerton. And I think those are two great musical performances of the year, of two musical icons. And I think they both nailed it.
Yep, they did.
Now, Best Picture and Best Director. If we had our way, Scorsese and The Irishman would be walking away with this, but that's not likely to happen, is it?
Well, again, never say never. You never know the Academy until it's done. There's a feeling in Hollywood that Scorsese could still win Best Director and lose Best Picture, or vice versa. The Irishman could steal Best Picture and lose Best Director. I think, and I think you think the same, that 1917 and Sam Mendes are going to win both. And I do think that's how Sunday night will come out. But there could be an upset. Parasite could win Best Picture. And my foot will go through the television if it does. Scorsese, again, might win Best Director. Tarantino might win Best Director. It's one of those years where things are so all over the place and so unpredictable, you just don't know. What I'm angry at is this insane backlash against Netflix. In November, The Irishman bona fide was going to win Best Picture and Director. It won the New York Film Critics Award. It won a bunch of other awards. The nominations come out, and then these whispers about Netflix started. Netflix had a hell of a year. You know, they had this film, they had Marriage Story, they had Uncut Gems, they had The Two Popes, they had Dolomite Is My Name. They had a rockin' good year and deserve all the accolades and all the nominations coming to them. And, you know, there were some nominations that they didn't get that they certainly should. Adam Sandler should be a Best Actor nominee. Eddie Murphy should be a Best Actor nominee. There should have been many other nominations for them, but didn't happen. And I think Hollywood and the Academy better get hip. And as Bob Dylan said, the times are a-changing. Get with them, or you're going to get left behind.
These streaming services are not going away. And if someone like Martin Scorsese can recognize that, I think it's time the Academy did as well.
Well, and also the Academy should look at the fact Martin Scorsese had to go to a streaming agency to get his film made. He took it to every major and minor studio, and nobody would make it. That's Martin Scorsese, for Christ's sakes. And so he had to go to Netflix to get his movie made. And more directors will do it. More and more actors will do it.
And Netflix gave, to their credit, they gave him the budget to do his special effects, and it was amazing. He pulled it off.
And they left him alone to make the movie, and they didn't bitch about the running time. He said, It's going to be 3 hours. Okay. Make it the length you need it to be. They didn't complain about anything. They left him. Scorsese himself said working for Netflix was an absolute pleasure because they let him do his job. They let him create the movie he wanted to make. He couldn't do that for Harvey Weinstein when he made Gangs of New York. Weinstein was on his ass about everything, about the budget, about the casting, about the length. He never let up. And you don't bother an artist. You let an artist create. And when he's as proven as Scorsese, Jesus, let him alone. The suits are going to tell him what to do. Give me a break.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a movie of 3.5 hours. I wouldn't want it a minute shorter.
No, and I've watched it in a single sitting 3 times now. You know, I admit, well, the last time I watched it, I broke it up over 2 nights because I was beat. But I sat and watched it the first 3 times all the way through. Didn't budge, didn't pause it, was with it all the way through and was absolutely into it. And I don't care how long a movie is. If it can hold your attention That's how long it's supposed to be. I remember seeing the Che Guevara movie by Steven Soderbergh at TIFF in 2005, and it was 5.5 hours long. And they had an intermission of 20 minutes and then back to the movie. And I was there, and I was involved through the whole film. Doesn't matter how long a movie is. If it's good enough to hold your attention and tell the story it needs to tell without any exploitive garbage, go with it. People bitched about Tarantino's movie being nearly 3 hours long. It was as long as it had to be and wildly entertaining.
Speaking about movies that were as long as they had to be and that are wildly entertaining, I really, really believe that Avengers Endgame should have gotten a Best Picture nomination. You might not agree with me, but I think it's a cinematic achievement that's unmatched by anything else that we've seen yet.
I don't disagree with that, but I think there were 10 better films this year. I think if they were going to nominate a 10th film, it might have been The Two Popes, it might have been Uncut Gems. I'm not sure Avengers Endgame was among the best films of the year, like the top 10 films of the year. I certainly liked it, you know that, and I certainly believe Robert Downey Jr. should have been a Best Supporting Actor nominee. Then we'd have a category to argue about, holy smokes.
Yeah.
But, it's just the way it happened this year.
Yeah, and for our listeners, coming around the corner right after the Oscars, John and I are going to do a podcast entirely dedicated to the superhero genre, so stay tuned for that. Very much looking forward to that. Are there any other comments on what to expect from this Sunday? Anything else you want to talk about?
Hopefully a short show. Get it up, get it over with,
I would like to see Taron Egerton and Elton John perform their song.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I like that they do that they bring the people in that actually sang the song in the movie now. It started with Springsteen back in '93, and brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So yeah, I hope they do that too.
Yeah, I remember actually last year the most sentimental award for me was one that was a lock, was Best Original Song, Shallow for A Star Is Born.
Absolute lock, and I think it should have won a few other awards too.
Agreed.
You go back and watch that movie, and I'm pretty hard-pressed to argue Gaga not winning Best Actress.
I'm with you 100%. I think it was the best film of the year. I wouldn't have given Best Actor to Cooper, although I think it is the best work he's ever done.
I agree with that. I think it's his finest performance by far, in fact.
Which is sort of amazing considering it was in his first directorial effort.
Yeah, and he's done some pretty formidable work. He was fantastic in American Sniper for Clint Eastwood. He was terrific in American Hustle. He's done a lot of good work, and he just stepped up his game completely. And I think the two of them had such great chemistry together and liked each other so much that they inspired each other. And you don't see that very often, especially in the directorial debut. I mean, the guy's panicking about keeping his film together. In fact, the last time I saw it in the directorial debut was Warren Beatty with Heaven Can Wait, and he had great chemistry with Julie Christie. So Cooper's in good company, and he's up for an Oscar this year too. He produced The Joker.
Yeah, and he was actually very involved in the editing room for Joker.
Yeah, he's a smart guy. He's a really smart guy.
I heard that his next movie he's directing is going to be a Leonard Bernstein film.
Yeah.
And Netflix just picked it up.
Netflix just picked it up, and they beat out Steven Spielberg as the producer.
So lots to look forward to from Mr. Cooper, and again from Netflix.
Absolutely, and there's a lot of great films coming out this year too. In a year, we'll be talking about all of them. We talk about the Oscars next year.
So what was it Warren Beatty said about the Oscars?
The Golden Globes are fun. The Academy Awards are business.
There you have it, folks. Our Oscar preview episode. For those counting, that's podcast number 6. I'd like to thank all of our listeners who've been tuning in. Be sure to check us out on the site at www.footandfriendsonfilm.com, everywhere on social media, and absolutely make sure to check out our YouTube channel to like and subscribe for this and all future episodes of the podcast. We got some exciting stuff coming up in the next few weeks. Going to welcome our staff writer Alan Hurst for an episode where we discuss Lucille Ball. John and I are going to explore the 1970s, and one I'm really excited about We're going to have a show that's a flipped interview. John's going to ask me the questions, and that will be an episode dedicated to the superhero genre. Until next time, we'll see you at the movies.